In a previous video, we learned about hanging things on drywall like picture frames or hanging things like shelves and how to make sure that it doesn't fall off. In this video, we're going to talk about the opposite. What happens when you no longer want that picture frame there and now you end up with a hole in your wall? What happens when you end up with a hole in your wall for some other reason? You accidentally poke a long object that you're trying to get into the house, into the wall, and poke a hole through it. So today's about patching holes in drywall. So let's get started. First thing is, if you're talking about trying to get rid of a hanger that you already had put in the wall, remember what holds the hanger in to begin with. You take the screwdriver and you twist it to tighten it. It expands that fastener and holds it. So the next logical thing would be to take that screwdriver, loosen the screw, and when you loosen the screw, if you leave the screw in a little bit at the end, it'll still hold the fastener and you might be able to pull it out. What if it doesn't come out on its own when you try to do it that way? Well, if you're left with just the fastener in there, next thing is find a pair of needle nose or long nose pliers, grab a hold of the edge of it and pull it out, and you'll end up with that fastener removed from the wall. We had a couple other kind of fasteners. This one you use a screwdriver to put it in, so same thing, you would back this one out and then you would patch the hole. So let's start with patching the hole. This one's very, very easy and very simple. There's a product that I'm sure you've heard of called spackle, and this particular spackle I really like because it has a dry time indicator, meaning you'll know when it's dry because of the color of it. It comes in a pinkish color, but it's pink only when it's wet. When it's dry, it changes to white, and then you know it's done. So we're going to pop this open. Wrong tool. There we go, that's a much better tool. Grab the wrong thing. And once we pop this open, inside, as I said, you can tell that it's pink. For little holes like this one or this one, we're just going to go over it with a putty knife and a little bit of spackle. Let it dry and then see from there. So take a little bit of the spackle with a putty knife and simply go over the hole. In the case of this one, I made a little bit of a mistake. I should have cut away the paper, this paper hanging that is from the drywall. Either cut it away or push it inward so it's not in your way. Otherwise, it'll be a problem. You want to go over the whole thing and fill it. Typically, I find that more than one coat is much better. So you're going to start with putting it on there. You don't want to leave messes like this. The messes that you leave have to be sanded off later. So it's much better, and you can wipe it on the side of the can. It's much better to try to get it as smooth as possible now, because that means less sanding later. So try to get it as smooth as possible now to avoid the sanding later. You're never going to totally avoid sanding, but you'll at least reduce the amount of sanding. Any junk, in this case I wiped some off on the edge of the can, you really, when you do that, sometimes there's stuff in it that shouldn't be there. You really don't want that getting back into it because that can cause problems later. So if you happen to see any on your blade, really don't wipe it on there, but in this case I just pulled it out of the container. So we get that on there reasonably smooth. You can see why it's going to take more than one coat. So we'll let that dry. That's going to take probably 45 minutes, maybe an hour to dry, and then we'll sand it down again and we'll put another coat on. Well, it's been a while and it's given itself time to dry, and now it's time to do the next step. The next step is sanding, and you need to select the correct sandpaper. If you don't know anything about sandpaper, there's a number on the back of each piece of sandpaper. This number is 120 that I'm choosing right now. I'm going to start with 120 because it's a little bit rougher sandpaper. The bigger the number, the smoother it is. The smaller the number, the rougher it is. So kind of have something almost in the middle, but a little bit more towards the rough side, so that it's going to take out the grooves and the scratches in it. So we're going to start with this and a piece of sandpaper and just begin sanding. And our goal is to get rid of all the bumps and all the grooves. So I do have a spot here where I didn't remove the paper that I should have. So I'm going to take my putty knife to start with and scrape that away. Try to get rid of some of the paper that shouldn't be there. It's only going to come back, it's not going to go away. And so I should have removed that first, but I didn't. And remove that part, and then we'll start applying more. So in trying to remove a little of that paper, I accidentally ripped and tore some of the other paper that's on there. But again, it doesn't matter. We're going to go back over with a second coat. So on the one hand, I was tempted not to show that part. But on the other hand, it's a good experience because this happens sometimes. Things happen and you got to fix it and not get all nervous that you might have done it wrong. So it happened. We're going to go right over it and try to fix it. I'm going to intentionally put it on a little thicker in the center here because of that spot and because of the holes are most likely there. And then I'm going to try to intentionally thin it out on the edges. So kind of holding the knife at a little bit of an angle and making the outer edge thinner, make the center a little humped up, and try to get rid of all these bumps. We want it to be smooth looking when we're done. We don't want all these bumps and marks in it. And that's what you want in the end, is something that looks nice and smooth, doesn't all bumped, and we'll wait for that to dry again. While we're waiting for that to dry, let's talk about a different type of patch. If you have a bigger hole like this one that's here, you might need to do something different than just spackle. Spackle won't fill a hole that big, and you can't really expect that stuff's going to stay in the hole very well. So what do? They make a product like this. The brand name's called Fiber Tape. It's just a patch for the wall, and on the back you can simply read the directions and it'll tell you everything you need to know about it. But the simple piece to it is that you open this up, and inside there's a piece of fiber tape. The fiber tape has a backing to it, so we find the backing of it. And we really want to make sure it's all clean and clear, so that's one thing I should definitely do. Is I just got done sanding. I want to make sure all the dust isn't mixed in with this part of it. So brush away any dust, dirt, anything like that. And we're going to take the tape, pull it off. Now this part's sticky, this part isn't. We're going to lay this over the hole, and I'm intentionally going to try to miss the part that we're doing over here so that it doesn't get in the way. I'm going to try to fill it and put the hole in the center as much as possible. Press all the way around it and press it into place, going over the top of the hole. Once I know that it's stuck to there really good, the next step is to cover it. Now you might be tempted to grab that putty knife and spackle again, but spackle's really not the best thing. You could do it, but it's better to use joint compound instead. So joint compound is this stuff, or it can come in a bag like this, or it can come in a big 5-gallon bucket. But the reality is you don't need a big 5-gallon bucket to patch a little hole. You only need a little small amount. So they make a little bucket like this that is for patching, and it even comes with the putty knife on the top of it. So for about $6 you can buy one of these and fill in the whole thing. I normally would just grab this and use it, or any joint compound that I have left over from a previous work and use it. But the problem with this one is that what I'm doing today has to be dry very quickly. So what I also have is a mix your own kind of joint compound. So it says Easy Sand 5, that means it dries in 5 minutes. So I can mix this up with water according to the instructions on the back. After I mix it up according to the instructions on the back, I have 5 minutes to put it on there before it's going to harden. So it doesn't give you much time. You got to work quick, but the plus side to that is we're not waiting an entire day to let it dry. If you use this stuff, you're talking about 1 day to let it dry, another coat on, a day to let it dry, another coat on. So you're talking 3 days before it's done. If I use this stuff, it means that I'm likely to finish it in about an hour, hour and a half. So it depends on your choices. If you have plenty of time, I would use the other stuff. If you're in a hurry, you might want to try this stuff. So we're going to mix this up first and see how it goes. So we're now starting with this stuff. The directions pretty much say 2-to-1 mix. So 2 cups of this stuff to a cup of water, or however you want, as long as it's that ratio of 2 to 1. So I currently have approaching 2 cups of this. We're going to mix in a cup of water in a minute. And the goal that you're trying for is to have something that's a mix between peanut butter and mayonnaise, pretty much, closer to peanut butter. You don't want it to be super thin, or it won't stick very well, and it will go right through the mesh that you're trying to get it to stick to. So I want it to be a little bit on the thicker side, closer to peanut butter. So I'll go grab some water and mix that up. So now I've added my water. I'm just going to use my putty knife to stir it. And if I put too much water in it, we'll know, and I'm pretty certain I did, because of how it's, I didn't really measure exactly. I just kind of figured it out. But I did measure the dry ingredients, the wet ingredients. I should have done differently, but it's okay. Again, you know what the consistency is that you want, and we just keep mixing until we get that. Obviously that's way too liquidy, so we want something that's more of a peanut butter consistency. So we'll add more dry ingredients, a little at a time, mixing and stirring until we get the right consistency that we want. That's stiffening up a lot, much better than what it was. You got to make sure you mix it well, though. If you don't mix it well, you're going to get clumps in your mix, and you don't want that. So this isn't bad, but I have some chunks in there, so I'm going to keep on mixing until I get that right. It's still more mayonnaise than peanut butter. Sprinkle a little more in there. When you get too close, that's where you want to be real careful about how much you're adding, because you can go too far the other direction and then you're adding more water, and you just keep going back and forth as you miss the point that you're looking for. So mix, mix, mix. I'm starting to feel it. It's starting to have a little bit of resistance when I stir it. It's really close, but I'd like it a little bit thicker, especially for our first coat. Add a little more. And this, I think, should be good. We'll see how this goes, but I'm pretty certain this will mix the way I want it. Again, make sure you stir really well. If you think, gee, that's too much, or not enough, just stir really well and see how it comes out. Give it a chance to form before you start adding more of anything to it. So we mix it up. Now I've got more of the consistency I'm looking for. Sticks, doesn't fall unless I'm merely making it, and it's the consistency we want. So we're going to go back over here, and then let's add it to our screen. I'm going to use the knife that was given in this kit instead. It's a little wider. It'll be a little easier to use a wider knife. If you're hardly ever going to do this, it doesn't make sense to go out and buy a $10 or $15 knife. It's a lot better to buy the plastic ones if you're almost never going to do this. But if it's something you're going to be doing a lot, it makes total sense to buy good ones. So depending on if you think you're going to do this a lot or not, buy the right tool depending on what you're going to do. So get a lot on here. You normally wouldn't use it out of a measuring cup, but again, I'm doing things based on what people would do at home with what they have at home. I'm just going to simply spread this on. And I'm intentionally trying not to get close to the patch on this side that the drink compound, the spackle is drying on. I'm trying to keep away from it. You want to go out beyond your patch. You don't want to just trust what you have. You want to go well beyond what your patch is, because you got to blend this in. That's something that sticks up. It's not something that's even with the material. So if you don't go out beyond it, you're going to see your patch. So come way out, what they call feather it out. So make it big and wide, feather it out. Remember this stuff, we only have 5 minutes. If it's true to its label, you have 5 minutes to do this before it hardens. And you're trying your best to have a nice, smooth surface when you're done, doesn't have lines in it. So behind the scenes here, I'm wiping off the putty knife, getting rid of the extra, coming back and really trying hard to do a nice, smooth job that doesn't have lines in it. Anything that has lines in it means I have to come back and I have to sand all those lines out. And now it looks like that hole is mostly gone. It's not really, it's still there, but it's hiding behind that patch. And with a little extra work, we will get rid of the whole thing and blend it in and hide it. And there, everything's gone. There's no lines in it. It's nice and smooth. And it does have a little hump in it. But later on, we're going to go back out around the edges and put more material once it dries. We're going to put more material around the edges and sand that out. So we'll give that a chance to dry and see what happens. So while I was over at the sink, I was washing all the parts and pieces and realized I probably should at least mention that too. It's really important that you get your tools nice and clean, and everything you're using. With the knives that are metal, you really should take the time to do a good job drying them off. You don't want to leave them wet or they will rust, and they will rust very quickly if you don't dry them off. So make sure they're all dry, and then your container as well, everything clean and dry and ready for the next time that you use it. So make sure you do a good job cleaning them off. Once the stuff hardens on there, it's very difficult to get it off. So when I'm almost done with the job and somebody will say to me, you know, are you almost done? Oh, I'm almost done, I just have to do the dishes. And it really is like that, sitting there rinsing and washing everything, cleaning everything and drying it and putting it away. So I'm not putting mine away yet because we still have a second coat, but that second coat's coming up, and in the meantime everything's clean and dry, and we'll get ready for the next coat. Okay, now some time has gone by, and we're going to focus on the side that has the spackle and the smaller holes. When you do that, we've already put on our first coat, we've sanded it down, we put on our second coat. We're hoping that's the final coat, but you never know until you're done sanding. So now I'm going to grab sandpaper that has 220 on the back of it and go ahead and start sanding with that. When you sand, you want to sand way out at the edges and try to blend that as much as possible. There should be no lines. It should be really blended. And when you think you've got it really well, you still got to do a little bit more because it will show up. There's a line right here. I'm not sure if that shows up on the camera, but there's a line in there. Let me try to zoom in a little bit. But there's a line right here that you can't leave that, or that'll be visible. A lot of times people think that the paint that goes on afterwards will cover it up. It will not cover anything up. It does more to show the blemishes and the defects than it does to hide it. So it's more likely to show it than hide it. And you see over here there's kind of like an edge that you can see, but over here it kind of turns to a fuzziness. That fuzziness is a good thing. You want it to look more fuzzy than a definite edge. So you're standing with the purpose of trying to make it look fuzzy along the edges so that it blends really good and doesn't make for an edge that is visible once it's painted. And other than a little blemish here, which I would go back and redo another coat and sand again and repeat the process, if that weren't there, I'd say we're all done and the hole is patched and ready for priming and painting, which that sounds like a topic for another video. Over here where there's the bigger hole, we talked about the idea of we put that piece of mesh over it first, then we put one coat of dry joint compound over it, and now it seems like we're ready for the next coat. So the first thing you can do is grab your putty knife. And anytime you're working with joint compound, after it's all done, it's a good idea to just lightly, you don't want to dig, but just lightly go around and try to knock off any pieces or chunks that don't belong that have formed. So you can usually get rid of a lot. There's a chunk right there that definitely shouldn't be. You can usually get rid of a lot just by doing this and knocking off any of the big chunks that really shouldn't be there. But if you push hard, you can end up digging in and doing more damage. But if I'm barely putting any pressure on it. I'm only holding it with a couple of fingers and just moving along ever so lightly. I don't want to dig into it. Once I've done that, we need to go back to our sandpaper that we had. So we'll grab that 120 grit sandpaper. And with that 120 grit sandpaper, we're going to sand this whole thing just like we did the last one. It's also a good idea to wear a dust mask when you do this. If you're doing a lot of sanding and creating a lot of dust, joint compound is a very dusty thing, and it's not something you want to regularly breathe. So I tend to go around the edges first to get the edges the way I want them. It's fuzzy up here. It's a sharp line right there. I don't want the sharp line, I want the fuzzier part. I'm going to sand until I get rid of that sharp line. So again, continuing to sand. Once you're happy with how the edges are, this is again down here, real sharp edge, not what we want. We want to blend that in. And then make your way across once you've got the edges done. And because this is mesh, you've got kind of the grid pattern of the mesh coming through. And that's actually coming out really good, almost to the point where I'd almost dare say you didn't need another coat, but you really do. You can see mesh over here and you can see mesh over there. So it's telling me it's coming out really good, but still need that second coat. So you'd mix up a second coat, spread it on there nice and smooth. Remember, nice, smooth, all the way across, no lines. The smoother you can make it, the less sanding you have to do later on. So all the way across, and this time when you put it on, go even wider, out to the edges here, out to the edges here. Smooth it all on, put it all on there, make sure it's nice and smooth, let it dry. After it dries, sand again, doing the same process all over again, and then it's ready to prime and paint. If you have a small hole, you can use the spackle and fill in this with the spackle. If you have a larger hole, you can use the mesh and the joint compound, and you spread it all on there and do the process that I showed you. If the hole's even bigger than that, well, that's a topic for another video. So there are easy ways to fix bigger holes too. You would cut out the rough part and fit that in, and I'm likely to do a video on that in the future too.